News publications, but like running a country.
Sometimes harder.
Sometimes harder.
No taxes are coming in. The point is that people are now consuming information differently. All of us have blind sides. If you have light coming from multiple prisms, and all of us have prisms, so you get a better approximation of the truth, and you can make sense of the world. And people retreat into echo chambers, and you're seeing private splendor and public squalor. And the way to come to grips with it is a renewal of the social contract, is a renaissance in politics. And this inevitably requires a thinking press.
Hi, I'm Bilter, and I'm sitting here with Atul Singh. He started Fair Observer. He is the organization's CEO, founder, and editor-in-chief. But he says he is like a cat with many lives. He studied philosophy, politics, and economics at the University of Oxford. He has his MBA from the Wharton School. He was also an officer in his home country of India and a corporate lawyer in London. He has taught political economy at UC Berkeley. He's a visiting professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, and now he runs Fair Observer, which is a nonprofit with over 2,200 now contributors from over 80 countries, and they run training programs around the world in writing, critical thinking, and to digital technology.
Digital media.
Okay, yeah. Digital media.
And you forgot, we actually publish a digital media platform, and that is on important issues in the world. It's basically world news, but it is a deeper look at the issues behind world news. It is context, and it is what we call a plurality of perspectives, which is a mouthful. But what it really means is you get many viewpoints from around the world, and even if you disagree with one or many, you at least know where these viewpoints are coming from, and you can always write your own viewpoint for us. Anyone can write for us. You can write for us. Any member of the audience can write for us. But everyone goes through the same editorial process with fact check, quality filter, and all that jazz. And our guidelines are there for everyone. fairobserver.com/publish. And we invite all of you to join the conversation.
So let's first start with what led you to shift your career to journalism. If you were working as a corporate lawyer before, journalism was a bit of a less stable industry, one might say.
I could give you a one-word answer for that: stupidity.
Okay.
But on a more serious note, I think the reason I ended up in journalism is because I truly believed that this was a calling for me that would enable me to have an impact, a positive impact, a productive impact, and a more thoughtful impact on society. And in corporate law, of course, I would earn decent money, not big money. That's what hedge fund managers make, or private equity people. But I would make, or tech people, not to forget them. I would make decent money, but I'd be making rich people richer, and that didn't seem to me to be exactly edifying at a time of increasing inequality. And I saw the journalism space, and this is of course 9 years ago, I saw the journalism space as fundamentally flawed. It has become more flawed since. And the flaws that I saw were threefold. One, there was too much noise. The noise to signal ratio was too high, too much noise, too little signal. Second, there was often very little context, whether political or historic or economic. And third, people were even then retreating into echo chambers. So you are a New Yorker, you read the New York Times, and that is your window to the world. You live in Mississippi, you listen to Fox News, and that is the oracle you believe and trust. If you are Indian, you read Times of India and you see which cricketer is sleeping with which Bollywood actress. And that's your news. And so on and so forth. And of course I'm exaggerating a bit, but what I'm saying is that people were in these echo chambers that were defined by where they lived, what the dominant media organization there was, what their friends were reading, and Facebook by that time had come, so this trend was exacerbating, and Twitter had come, and this thing has become really dire now. But even at that time, for instance, if you were a New Yorker and you wanted to understand, say Kenya or Kashmir, which is in the news these days, you had your standard New York Times correspondent you turned to, or BBC. And what we thought was very important was to, yes, have that New Yorker's perspective, or have the perspective of someone who's worked in the State Department, or someone who's a professor at Oxford, but also have the perspective of someone in Kashmir, or someone in Delhi, or someone in Pakistan, or someone in Kenya. And the idea is all of us have blind sides, but if you have light coming from multiple prisms, and all of us have prisms, and those prisms are defined by our background, by our personality, by our education, by our deep-seated religious or cultural beliefs. The point is, if you see the world, or if you have light coming from many prisms, you get a better approximation of the truth, and you can make sense of the world. And that was the premise, and that is why we created right from the outset a bottom-up media organization in which there'd be multiple voices. There wouldn't be the top-down authoritative voice of conventional media, the foreign correspondent packed off to Delhi or Nairobi or Buenos Aires or wherever, and he hangs around in the country club or a club or a five-star hotel quite often these days, and then reports back. And we thought, whilst there were some foreign correspondents who were great, Sir Mark Tully being a classic example, Sir Mark Tully of the BBC, now in his 80s, in India, may he live long, but there was a big flaw in that model, and we wanted to build bridges across divides and borders in a more interconnected, more interlinked, and a more multicultural, multipolar world. And that was the premise, and that's why we do what we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're comparing your organization then to a lot of other organizations that are keeping people in echo chambers. So I imagine that your audience might be those people who are trapped in those echo chambers at present. But explicitly, who is your intended audience? Do you think you're reaching them?
Well, we are not reaching all of them. We are reaching only a fraction of them. So those of you who are watching this, get people to go to fairobserver.com, sign up for our newsletter, email newsletter. It's free. Follow us on social media and get all your friends to do so as well. We are a poor non-profit. We do not have the marketing budget of corporate media or big older organizations. So we need you. So much so for the plug I made. We are reaching a fraction of the audience. And how are we reaching them? Through Google, through the dominant platforms, of course, such as Facebook and Twitter. Of course, Google is one of them. Through our email newsletter, through word of mouth. People like you share articles with their friends, get their friends to read us and write for us. And we are doing so very organically, because there is a real hunger now, particularly amongst young readers, to have different perspectives, to have a fresh view of the world. The young realize that they will have to live with climate change. The old will be dead. I will be dead before you. I'm bald already. And there are challenges, not just about climate change, about the price of education or the cost of education, of the challenges of even drinking water or water, challenges of inequality, challenges even more importantly than inequality of low social mobility. This is yet another era where you are starting to see the lords in the manor and les sans-culottes, the French word for those without stockings, lower class people, living in parallel lives, in parallel universes. So I think the young instinctively and intuitively feel they need something fresher, and ipso facto are turning to sources they think might give them that. And it is my belief that we are fresher, and we are certainly high quality, and we are certainly very diverse, and we are very democratic. And so that is why the bulk of our readership is young. In fact, I would say the bulk of our readership is 18 to 34-year-olds who generally live in the more educated areas in the world: Bay Area, New York area, Washington DC area, Boston area, London, Bangalore in India, Singapore, Hong Kong, and so on and so forth. So that is the bulk of our readership. But remember, there are lots of older people who read us, and some of our readers are even in their 90s.
Wow.
We don't know of anyone who's over 100 though. So if you can get us a centurion...
I'd be impressed if you could find that statistic.
Well,
maybe
you
we can start if you're keeping track of that. But as a young person who reads, has started reading your publication for the precise reasons that you just outlined, I cannot deny that that population exists. But at the same time, we're seeing this rapid growth of social media, and we're seeing people use that as a source of news. And we're also seeing the funding for journalism changing, with even Associated Press having to close bureaus abroad and change their model. So how are you adapting to these changes in the journalism industry?
That is a tough question. Not because it is you've asked it in a tough manner, but because it is existential. Yes. We will live and die, hopefully not die, by our ability to adapt. And well, I would say that the growth in social media has peaked. Social media has grown dramatically. Now, actually, the rate of growth is slower. But you make a very important point, and that point is simple. The point is that people are now consuming information differently. Instagram is popular. I'm sure there are other apps too that are popular. Image-based consumption of information is increasingly the norm for large numbers of people, and not just the young. Fewer people are reading now. A smaller percentage of people are now read now than, let's say, pre-cell phone era. I remember I used to sit down and go through the whole newspaper, cover to cover, every page. Do I do that with any newspaper today? The answer is no. My reading, even my own reading, is more selective, and I read very widely. Because I travel too much. But each time I get a newspaper, a print newspaper, a print magazine, the quality of my focus goes up, the quantity of my reading increases. So it is a fact. It is what the French would say, a fait accompli, an accomplished fact, or let's say a proven fact, that people are reading less. So now that we know that people are reading less and they're using more social media, what can we do? First thing we've done is we've launched a new website, completely new design, thanks of course to our managing editor, who's a genius, Abul Hasanat Siddiq, and our team in India, in Netleon, our team in Jaipur, named Netleon, who've done a great job. I think Lokendra Singh led the project, and he worked very hard, and we are very pleased with the end product. And it has podcasts, it has space for video, it has interactive features on the World Cup football. So all of you who like football should go and check out, if nothing else, check out the timeline of the World Cup, from the very first World Cup to the last one, which France won. And we have something called My Voice. And all you need to record a video in My Voice is use a cell phone and say something for 2 or 3 minutes. You can all read the guidelines there in detail at fairobserver.com/publish. But the point is, we are adapting by being open to new forms of both production of content and consumption of content.
Okay, yeah. You mentioned something earlier about how you are able to read a lot more thoroughly when you have a print newspaper in front of you, but your publication is exclusively online.
Yeah.
So is there something, I assume you'd have to expand your operations considerably to produce something in print,
Yeah.
but do you think that there is value to having a print component of your publication that you're missing at the moment?
Absolutely. Find us funding and we'll do it tomorrow.
Fair enough.
The answer is yes, we'd love to have a print publication, and we'd love to mail them to people. Selling them through stores is a more elaborate process. You need to have branding and supply chains. But we'd love to mail people monthlies in print, so that it can sit on coffee tables such as this one, and people can read it at their leisure, undistracted by their laptop and emails and phones and messages. So yes, print is fantastic, but it costs money.
So you mentioned earlier that we're receiving information through a lot of images as opposed to words. Is that a problem?
Ooh la la. The answer is yes. The answer is yes. In some ways it is, because the challenge with images is that they are very fleeting and transient, and you don't have to engage as much with them, and you're not having to think and focus as much. And of course, it depends on the quality of what you're reading. If what you're reading is crappy prose and hateful jargon, then, or hateful diatribe, then maybe not. Maybe it doesn't make a difference. But let's say if you want to understand the Iran nuclear deal, it's much better to read a weighty article that goes into the historical background, etc., rather than something in 2 minutes, a video in 2 minutes that tells you everything. Because that also makes you a bit passive, because reading is a more active exercise. You've got to pick it up, read, understand, pause, think, whilst you're much more open to manipulation when video is in play, because the director can use sound effects, zoom in, zoom out. I mean, there's a reason Leni Riefenstahl directed all of Hitler's movies, or you can say videos. I mean, the first time we saw propaganda in a really clever way was Nazi Germany. And so if Leni could do it then, are you telling me that others haven't figured out how to do it now? I refuse to believe it. So this is not to say that you can't be manipulated through words, but what I'm saying is that the danger of images, and particularly moving images, is much greater.
Do you think propaganda is a huge problem in the US, or do you think it exists at all?
It's a huge problem globally.
Yeah, but outside of authoritarian regimes.
Yes, of course it is, because authoritarian regimes, in some ways, it is better have propaganda in authoritarian regimes, because I was growing up in India and we had Doordarshan, but no one really believed when Doordarshan said great things about the government, because we were leading tough lives. And so, did we believe Indira Gandhi was a great leader? Well, some people did. And those people who did were deemed to be conformists and not so intelligent. And if you were bright, you knew that the Nehru family was full of shit. It was full of bullshit. And the reason is very simple, is that the difference between the rhetoric and the reality was simply too high. Similarly, in the erstwhile Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, people just dismissed what Pravda said or whatever your Communist Party paper said. In democracies, you now have concentration of power. You have, I believe what I read last, there were 6 companies that own most of the media. And of course, you've got big families, or not big families, a big family. I think Salzburgers own New York Times. And of course, Jeff Bezos has bought Washington Post. And there's some chap who's bought the LA Times. Now, they may all be wonderful human beings. I have no idea what they are like, but this trend of media being in the pockets of billionaires at a time when their power is expanding, at a time when wealth concentration is a problem in society, bodes ill for the future of America. And if you want to see propaganda, look at MSNBC and look at Fox News. In my view, both of them are propagandistic, because you already know before you switch on the television what they are going to say, which for me is ridiculous. And the reality is that there's an element of truth to the idea that the US is not entirely a free country anymore. And you are indeed free to buy anything. You are indeed free to start a business. You are indeed free largely to move around. And of course to mouth off on Twitter. But it is really difficult for you to get free and fair information to make a good decision as a citizen. Because the incentives of for-profit news media are simple. They've got to keep your attention, and they've got to monetize it through ads, and they've got to return that money to shareholders. That's the incentive, regardless of how wonderful human beings how wonderful they may happen to be and how they are as human beings. If a CEO has poor quarterly results, a string of them, the CEO gets fired. That's it. Those are the rules of the game. So in my view, for-profit media, the model itself is toxic. You can't blame the people. You've got to look at the structure. And if you're running for-profit media, then you cannot ask deep and uncomfortable questions, because you've got to provide people entertainment. And you've got to provide people what they are comfortable with. So if it is someone on the right, you have Fox News. It reassures them, doesn't challenge any of their notions. If it's someone on the left, then you have MSNBC. And you don't raise uncomfortable questions about your side. And so, because you want people to be very tribal in their loyalty. And so I do think that is particularly dangerous. And I therefore do believe that independent media is part of the solution. Of course, better civic education, we could go on. There are many things, better social mobilization, we could go on. But independent media and the non-profit model, and independent non-profit media, is a better model than the for-profit model. And I've thought very deeply about it and thought long and hard about it. And I've come to the conclusion that as things stand, the freedom of media in the US is constrained by commercial pressures, and they've got to engage in spin, PR, and propaganda to drive home profits. And it is incredibly unhealthy, not just for democracy, but also for society as a whole.
Yes, and on the tangential topic of lack of trust in the media, you were one of the early predictors of the rise of the far right in your writing, and we see the wave of anti-intellectualism that comes with that. Where do you see trust in the media going down the road in this age of fake news, the crusade against the press? What do you think is coming for us next?
I hope not war. I hope not ethnic cleansing, although you've had ethnic cleansing in parts of the world. So I think there'll be a swing back. I think the fact that you have outfits like Fair Observer, and you have others such as ProPublica, which is much richer than us, but they do good work. You have the BBC, which is funded by the government in the taxpayer actually in the UK, but which has outstanding standards of reporting. And the fact that you have Agence France Presse in Paris, the fact that you have Deutsche Welle, I suppose is the pronunciation. I apologize to Germans if I'm messing it up. But you've got a whole bunch of media organizations around the world, and even in the US, there is a renewed effort to support good media. The number of our donors, monthly donors, is going up. So it's not going up as fast as we would like, but it is going up. So clearly people are seeing the necessity of consuming and supporting better media. So I think this shall pass. Having said that, I don't want to underscore the risks. You're right. Things could get very ugly. Journalism could shrink even further. AP has closed bureaus, as you just put it. That is a terrible trend in some ways. In some ways, maybe not. Maybe our model of having different people around the world could, to some extent, mitigate against that. But it is certainly true that with less scrutiny, we might see this golden age of government, of corruption at local government and indeed national governments in many parts of the world, where you are seeing a massive pilfering of the public exchequer or the public treasury, and you're seeing private splendor and public squalor. This might lead to disturbances, unrest, violence, revolts, revolutions, and wars. So if somehow we cannot get on top of this trend, and if discourse becomes more hateful, if people retreat into echo chambers and alternative universes, then sort of mass killing you're seeing. And we've had quite a few recently, could amplify even in the US, which is relatively much more secure than other parts of the world because it has got two oceans between it and the rest of the world. So it has less danger of terrorist attacks, less danger of, certainly no danger of soldiers coming in to invade America. That passed with the passing of the British Empire. But you certainly have a big problem at home of mass shootings, of extraordinary high violence in inner cities, and so on and so forth. And the way to come to grips with it is a renewal of the social contract, is a renaissance in politics, and this inevitably requires a thinking press, or some place where citizens can reflect and ponder and address the issues of the day, because that is what has been fundamental, going back either to the French Revolution and les philosophes, or Camille Desmoulins writing or editing and writing a newspaper, or Benjamin Franklin in the American Revolution in 1776. Or Tom Paine, who wrote Common Sense. Without ideas, without discourse, you cannot have a renewal of democracy.
You told me shortly after we met that if you search Africa in the news, the first article that comes up written by an African would be yours. It would come up on the first couple of pages.
I think we came up on the first page, not
on
the
first
article.
page. Okay,
Yeah,
the first.
There are others with bigger budgets and better Google search engine optimizations, but we did show up on the first page.
Okay, on the first page. The point
Yeah.
is, very few articles are written by people who live in the region.
Ours
the article
was.
is written about, but
Yeah.
yours was,
Yeah.
yes. So, do you think that this could be the new model that is replacing foreign correspondents in bureaus around the world, because journalism is changing so rapidly? And can your model be applied to other outlets?
Well, that's a fantastic question, actually, a thoughtful one. Is there value to a foreign correspondent? I'd say at times yes. After all, Gandhi's Salt March was covered by an American correspondent, and he did a very good job. He took it to the wider world. I don't think an Indian could have covered it as well. I believe his name was Walker. Mm-hmm. I may be wrong. We'll have to check it. I'm talking of the Great Dandi Salt March and the Dharasana salt works, when wave after wave of Indians would just march non-violently in white clothes, and the British would beat them up, and women would carry off those who had fallen, and they'd have cracked skulls and broken bones and blood on their white clothes. And that was brought to light to the world by an American correspondent. So, is there merit to foreign correspondents? Yes, at their best, yes. And I'd go back to Samak Tali. Why do I keep naming a man who's well over 80? Well, because he was bloody good. Mm-hmm. I can't think of any foreign correspondent who has been more perceptive on India than Mark. And by a long way. So Mark's example shows that there is merit in the foreign correspondent model. At its best, the outsider has an objectivity. So if you are in a place like, say, Beirut, or for that matter, Jerusalem, a foreign correspondent can report with greater objectivity, in theory. In theory. The downside of that model, and every model is flawed, ours has flaws too. There is no model that is perfect. The honest thing to do is to look at the flaws in your model and keep trying to overcome it, and keep trying to mitigate those flaws. And the problem with the foreign correspondent model occurs when you pack off, and the New York Times has a great speciality in this. In fact, if you want to see Africans, particularly Kenyans, making fun of the New York Times job ad, you just have to go to Twitter and look at it. My Russian friend, Tessa, pointed it out to me, and I couldn't just stop laughing. And the New York Times has a terrible track record in India. Some time ago, they sent some chap from Yale who had never studied Indian history, knew nothing about Indian culture, and left without speaking a single word, or I exaggerate, left without speaking any Indian language, even cursory phrases in that language. And even when they chose an Indian American to report on India, it's interesting. I met that chap. I'm forgetting his name. he's written a book and a bestseller and all that since, but he just wouldn't speak to me in any Indian language. And it was just fascinating. And he just told me what India was all about. And didn't have a single question for me. I met him at Harvard. It was fascinating. It was like theatre of the absurd. Here I am, having served as an officer, having grown up all around the country. I do speak, one Indian language fairly well, and a few others I can understand, survive sort of in them. And here's this American waxing lyrical, without a single question for me. And that's where the foreign correspondent model is dangerous. Because when your foreign correspondent goes and hangs out in fancy clubs, maybe not so fancy clubs, few coffee shops, and in cases of developing countries, because a lot of these foreign correspondents, especially if they've gone to Harvard and Yale, have their buddies who went to Harvard and Yale, who only go to 5-star hotels. Then what they are talking is just garbage, absolute garbage. It sort of sounds good if you don't know the country, and when you do, you realize, my God, there is no nuance. There is no understanding. They are like floats out, very surface, and in 3 years they will leave. And they'll write a book on India, or Kenya, or wherever they happen to be. What Donald Trump calls the shithole countries. And that's a big challenge with the foreign correspondent model. And before someone gets the idea that it's just the Americans to blame, no, not at all. Indian foreign correspondents here and in London have been atrocious. They've been insular. They've been completely immersed only in Indian circles. They know absolutely nothing about the country. And so the danger goes both ways. And that is the challenge with the foreign correspondent model. So it's not the people per se who are bad or good. The point is that model has worsened with the demands of the internet, because people back home want stories immediately, and you're just airdropped, and you just have to start churning out stories, and you don't have time and space to develop that understanding that Sir Mark Tully did. And the foreign correspondent model at its best works beautifully, but at its worst is neo-imperialism. There's no other word for it. A privileged person showing up, and in the case of, and it works even in the case of the foreign correspondent from India, they're generally privileged people. So it is neo-imperialism or elitism to qualify that. Can our model help solve it? Of course, I believe our model can help solve it, because it is not just foreign correspondents. For instance, on Iran, we publish Ian McCready, a British diplomat who has served in Iran. We publish Iranians, some of whom write anonymously from Tehran. We publish me, who's Indian, a view on Iran. We publish a diversity of perspectives, and we can fact check using our editing team and our contributors. And someone in our network will speak the local language, will know the local place inside out. So it is a far more distributed network, far more crowdsourced, but with a quality filter, with constant checks and balances to make sure that we don't publish something that is wrong in the facts. We don't publish something plagiarized, and we do have a problem with some writers plagiarizing from some countries. Mine is one. In India is a classic example where plagiarism is rife, and we have to keep an eye on it, an eagle eye on it. We have all that checks, but once you have a trusted network, once you have a group of contributors who are rigorous, then they're an incredible resource. And it is my fervent belief that our model will be one of the solutions, not the only one, to the problems journalism faces. Because what we do is explanatory journalism, open-minded, multi-viewpoint, multinational, not in the sense of big companies, but lots of people from different countries, different cultures, and we are home for diversity and debate. There'll be some others who will figure out how to do investigative journalism. There'll be yet others who will figure out how to do news reporting, because we look at the deeper issues behind the news. We don't do breaking news, but there'll be people who will figure out how to do that using elements of our model. So ours will be, I fervently believe that ours will be one of the models that will work in the future. And like all models, we'll have to constantly refine it, like the foreign correspondent model.
Who is doing it best? What's the best model you've seen, assuming that it's not necessarily your own?
I don't think we are at that stage that we can say who's doing it best. I think a lot of people are trying very interesting things in journalism. It is a tough time, but it's also a very interesting time. We are inspired by a number of people, organizations, big and small. We have a lot of respect for a lot of organizations, including, by the way, the New York Times. The New York Times does very good work inside the country. Their work on many issues in America is fantastic. Of course, I like ProPublica. Of course, when it comes to international, or let's say journals in other parts of the world, there are many that I really like. I think the German press is fantastic. They are trying interesting things. There's a Dutch newspaper that is crowdfunded. That's a very interesting development. The French obviously have a different approach, different model, but they've kept up quality standards. It's always a pleasure to read Le Monde Diplomatique, The Economist, which I'm sure many people, particularly in the English-speaking world, read, is still a fantastic paper for all its faults, and it has many. I love The Economist coverage on the US, obviously on the UK, and on Europe. The further they go into the non-white world, into what Joseph Conrad once called the heart of darkness, the less I trust them. Then there are huge risks of the foreign correspondent model. The Financial Times, which is now owned by the Japanese, that's pretty good. Although I disagree with lots of things they write. In fact, probably I disagree with most of their editorials. I think it is the voice of the Anglo-Saxon wealthy elite, or people who believe in the Anglo-Saxon model, just as fervent Christians believe in the Bible, or devout Muslims believe in the Quran. And I have my differences with them, but they do good work. Their standards of reporting are great. But again, the Financial Times, I trust them less and less when they cover Africa or India. I have not been impressed by the last few Financial Times correspondents in India. They ain't no Sir Mark Tully. So the model is go 3 years, hang out with celebrities, and then write a book, be an India expert. Which is, come on, take a deep breath.
Well, then on a more individual level than whichever model a certain news organization employs, what does it mean to be qualified to write a story about a particular region? Or
I would just put it very simply. Your qualification lies in the quality of your content. You are eminently qualified to write on Israel and Palestine.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, but
I've studied it somewhat in school.
Yeah, but yeah,
yes, have read a lot.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I also think that there are a lot of aspects about Israel and Palestine that I am not qualified to write about.
Of course.
Yes.
So I didn't say all aspects,
yeah.
but you're certainly, given the fact, and I've read your papers, given the fact that you've done extensive reading and you have a strong sense of justice and you believe in peace. You have a point of view which is very valuable. It is the point of view of someone who's young and idealistic. And, and that has a value. So who's qualified to write the quality of your content? As long as you write something that is fact-based and well-reasoned, that's fine. How does it matter if you're 16 or you're 61? Or you are a retired ambassador, retired diplomat. My chairman, Gary Grapple, is someone who retired from Jerusalem. He is a scholar, he's a gentleman, and he's a true citizen of the world, multilingual, invariably refined, extraordinarily polite, and just a very good human being. And obviously he will write with the weight of experience. But he is not beginning life. On certain things you will have perhaps the advantage of youth. You will have more creative or more interesting insights. And there are certain things that you would lack in, which he would have, which is the knowledge of history and region and culture and language and the weight of experience. And the point is, who's qualified to write? Both of you.
So you're operating all around the world, and norms vary in different countries, journalistic norms, whether that's language or objectivity, or rather impartiality, if you believe objectivity doesn't exist. To what extent do you think you abide by norms?
Oh, we think very deeply and we abide completely by norms. They may not be the norms that some other organizations have. Our norms may be slightly different, but we think very deeply and we spend a lot of time deciding what are our norms. We have our deputy managing editor, Anna Pivovarchuk, who is incredibly focused when it comes to grammar, fact check, very tough, very Russian. What do you expect? The great Russian intellectual tradition lives on in her, from Pushkin to Dostoevsky to Chekhov to God knows what. I'm not qualified enough to name all the writers in the pantheon, but long story short, Abul Hassanat, my managing editor, who has an eagle eye and is brilliant, and Anna and I spent a lot of time thinking, okay, we have a very diverse group of people from around the world with different levels of language, with different styles. How do we remain democratic, meaning we are open to everyone, but at the same time not lose our quality? And our norms, you can read our values on the website, but some of our norms are simple, that if you are a contributor, be honest. Have your own point of view, don't plagiarize. Then be right on the facts. Don't lie about the facts. Yes, of course, two people will have two different perspectives, or 5 people will have possibly 5 different perspectives about a particular fact. For instance, Gandhi viewed the partition of India as a great tragedy, and he wasn't there to celebrate independence. And there were other Indians who were throwing their caps in the air on 15th August 1947. So there's a difference of opinion even in 1947 as to amongst top leaders and between the leader and his people about what it meant. So you can have 2 different views, but the fact is that India did get independent on 15th August 1947. That's a fact. The fact is that the sun does rise from the east. That is generally a fact. one would hope so. The fact is that there are certain things that have been recorded through time, and you can refer back to them, you can hyperlink. We prefer hyperlink. Other places, of course, books, etc., have footnotes or endnotes. And what we say is that be fact-based, be well-reasoned, be civil, be courteous. For instance, if someone was to write an article that we should kill all the members of this tribe that lives high in the mountains because they are not productive, would we publish it? The answer is no, of course not. Why? Because A, that's plain wrong, and B, we believe that part of the norms of journalism are not to incite hatred or war or any form of violence or ethnic cleansing. So what we think about norms is that one of our norms is have an open door policy for anyone from any age, from any country, etc., to write for us. B, however, that person, if they are not of the standard, their writing is not of the standard we want them to be, or what that we deem is quite there to be published. We work with them, we edit them, we train them. In fact, we've published 16-year-olds from Gaza. And the reason we've been able to publish 16-year-olds from Gaza is because Abul Hasanath and Anna work incessantly, sleep early in the morning or late at night, in whatever way you want to define it, on building the capacity, on training the contributors who come to us and who join us. So our norms are the bedrock of what we do, and I think journalistic norms do matter. And I will just touch upon impartiality before moving on. Impartiality is hard because we accept that you're defined by whatever background, etc. you are, but what we expect you to be is make your point of view rigorously. So I will defend unto death your right to disagree with me, but all I ask is that that disagreement should not descend into diatribe. If that makes sense.
Well backed up. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Have a point of view. Have a strong point of view. That's okay. But please, be fact-based and well-reasoned. If that answers your question.
Yes, and you have my full confidence that you have a rigorous and moral process for creating the standards there, that you hold your articles up to.
Our guidelines are open access. You want to read that, you can, and you can read our values as well. I didn't go into each value because I think then it becomes stilted, the conversation.
Yes, but yeah, you have my full confidence that everything goes through a rigorous process and is held up to a high standard. But what about things like language that are a little more arbitrary? And how accessible do you think your publication is to the younger audience that you say it makes up a lot of your readership? You make a lot of references that you might have to look up on the internet if you haven't been educated at Oxford and Wharton.
I didn't get much of an education at Wharton. I went to school there. I wasn't educated there. There are no references that come from there.
Okay, well, Oxford then.
Yes, that's true.
That's something that most of the world is not experienced. So
I'm one of the 2,200 plus people who write, and I agree that there are lots of references that I give. I think the new website is an effort to make it more accessible. I also think that what I write in terms of language might be a little more sort of playful and nuanced and have references. That's true, but we focus on having simplicity and accessibility, active voice, shorter sentences, in general, clear summaries right at the top of the article. So we focus really hard on being accessible, but at the same time, we believe that simplicity does not necessarily mean becoming simplistic. And that's the trap we want to avoid. And I actually have had a number of younger readers from all kinds of schools around the world. People who go to Moi University, who read my writing regularly, and people who go to IIT. And yes, some say, certainly say that there are many references and there are hyperlinks and they have to check things. And I say, look, I write to inform and educate. Think of it as an education. And I hope I write accessibly, but I certainly don't want to dumb down anything. And I use my writing as an opportunity to give glimpses into history, to show how economic trends underlie, or economic factors underlie a certain political trend, or vice versa. And if I'm not accessible enough, you can email me next time. Any one of you can email me next time, and I will try my best to improve.
I think reading your articles is a bit of a history lesson in itself, so I enjoy it.
So those of you who write history can read me, and the rest can read the other articles.
Well, it gives the most context possible if you're making a lot of references to the things that have happened prior to whatever event you're explaining. Okay, to transition. What could other media organizations learn from you?
What could they learn from me? I think we have a lot to learn from them. We've got to improve, for instance, our distribution. So we have to learn from media organizations who use emails very well. Email newsletters have taken off. We've got to learn how to raise money better. Some people do it much better than us. We've got a lot to learn as well, but what could other media organizations learn from us? I think the first thing they could learn is the embrace of democracy, and I mean it in the widest sense of the word, the embrace of democracy that we have engaged in. And by that I mean Fair Observer is truly, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart, a digital media platform for anyone to publish on. And I cannot say the same is true for, let's say, Project Syndicate, another fantastic online platform. But you've got to be a Nobel Prize winner you've got to be a Nobel Prize winner or a Harvard professor to write for Project Syndicate. And I think, for instance, the conversation, you've got to be an academic, and the conversation is academics largely from American or Australian or first world universities. It was started with, I believe, Australian money. So I understand, but all these publications are great, but they're still exclusive clubs. We believe that anyone can write for us. That's one thing that others can learn. The second thing people could learn is the energy we put in working with our contributors and in our training programs. And I say this because this is part of the democratic approach. It's allied to it. Democracy is always hard. You want to run something efficiently, get Steve Jobs to do it. He'll do it brilliantly. And you grew up in the Bay Area.
I did. We've discussed what you call the efficiency, equity paradigm.
Paradox or paradigm, or whatever you want to call it, right? So if you make a decision unilaterally, it'll be far more efficient than two of us talking and making it. Right? And so democracy is hard. It means, you know, you sort of have to engage, you have majority decisions by majority, but that doesn't mean that 51 people out of 100 can vote that 49 be killed. Right? That doesn't make sense. So you have to have minority protections. You've got to raise the level of discussion, because you don't want democracy to descend into a mob, which is what happens on social media. So the third thing that other media organizations could learn from us is, how do we combine, on the one hand, crowdsourcing content with a high quality standards? So we are combining quality and diversity. How do we do that? And the answer is have clear contributor guidelines. You've obviously read them. A lot of people do not and send us articles, but you know, or want to publish videos with us or podcasts with us. But a good idea is to have clear guidelines, a very detailed editing process where you give feedback. You have an editing team that really cares about the contributors and invests in them. I have not seen many editors, and I've seen quite a few, invest their time and energy and passion the way Abul Hassan and Anna do, and I think that is what sets the tone for the team. So I think what they could learn from us are these three things. I suspect there are a few others. Oh yes, what they could learn from us is grit. We've functioned very long for very little, and I can tell you that if I hadn't grown up in a third world country, if I hadn't had a tough and rough and tumble life, I would have probably not been able to do this. So we've made the penny or the cent last very long and done a lot with it, and you won't believe how little we function. And the reason we've been able to do that is because we've had relationships, because we've had support. You know, I've been a global nomad. I've stayed with friends around the world, and so on and so forth. And I think this grit combined with commitment to journalism, come hell or high water, and the ability to take hardship and to overcome hardship and to overcome challenges, and to stay the course regardless of the storms and the waves and the winds that buffet you, is something I think hopefully people can learn from us. And to your question of funding, the way we are looking for funding is threefold. First, of course, we have a big monthly donor campaign. Our goal is to reach 1,001 monthly donors. And the reason is simple. Free media cannot be free. If you have free media, that is, if you have free media, you're in the pocket of owners or advertisers. The two legs of journalism are gone. First leg is subscription. Hardly anyone pays. The second leg is advertising, which has gone with Google and Facebook. So what we ask people is, look, donate $1 a month, or donate 25, donate 50, God knows what. Different people have different incomes and different spending. And, different, charities they prefer too. But we say, okay, if you think journalism matters to society, if you think you need high quality, fact-based, well-reasoned, diverse journalism, then donate monthly, but be a monthly donor, because a one-time donation means we are chasing people. So it's much better that we get recurring donors, monthly or annual. The amount is less important than the number of donors. So that is our funding strategy. That's number one, the monthly donor campaign. Number two, we are also approaching bigger donors who can write bigger checks, anything from 500,000 to ideally $1 million. Which you cannot write, of course.
Not at this age.
Not at this age.
Probably never.
Oh, don't lose hope. And of course, the third thing is finding grants for our training programs, which we aim and plan to do around the world, and we want to do them all the way from high schools up to younger people who may be professionals starting out in their careers. Mm-hmm. So that is our funding strategy. Of course, over time we will refine it even further, but as of now, this is what we are gunning for to achieve sustainability. I guess I've said too much. I think we have more. Having said that, we have more to learn than others can from us. I think we are young. We made mistakes, but we are growing. We are hopefully a bit older and a bit wiser, and the best things lie ahead.
Thank you so much for watching. Go to fairobserver.com to read their content. Sign up for the newsletter, and if you're on social media, go ahead and follow on social media as well. And thank you so much for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.